With a final, hesitant glance at the cat's sad, pleading eyes, Anna made her decision. She carefully scooped the small creature into her arms, cradling it close to her chest. It was surprisingly light, and she could feel its tiny heart pounding against her own. She held her breath as she turned to head back toward her house, praying no one would see her. The last thing she needed was to get into trouble. Chapter 1. The Misty Dawn. The morning fog clung to the streets, thick and silent, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The quiet of the early hours was only broken by the occasional sound of tires skimming the wet asphalt. Everything seemed still, almost suspended in time. Anna, a young girl of 11, sat by her bedroom window, her wide eyes glued to the world outside. The air was crisp, and she could feel the chill seeping through the window as she absent-mindedly drew patterns on the glass with her finger. She had always loved mornings like this, the calm before the day began in earnest. It was the one time she felt most at peace. Her parents were still asleep, and the house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock and the occasional rustle of the trees outside. The neighborhood was still asleep too, the streets almost empty, save for a few early risers walking their dogs or heading off to work. Anna's gaze shifted to a small alleyway down the street where a stray cat often wandered. She had noticed it several times, a scrappy little thing, thin and wary, but always with a flicker of hope in its eyes. The cat was a gray tabby with soft, delicate features, but it had clearly been through a lot. Its fur was matted in places, and its ribs were visible beneath its thin coat. Anna felt a pang of sympathy whenever she saw it. She longed to help, but her parents had always told her not to approach stray animals. They were unpredictable, dangerous even, and could carry diseases. Yet today was different. Today, the fog had given everything a strange sense of urgency, and the little tabby was nowhere to be seen. Anna frowned and leaned forward, her eyes scanning the mist for any sign of movement. She had a strange feeling, a whisper in the back of her mind telling her something wasn't right. It was then that she saw it. The tabby was limping down the alleyway, dragging its hind leg behind it. Anna's heart skipped a beat. The cat was in trouble. Without thinking, she threw on her jacket and hurried out the door, her footsteps light and swift as she made her way down the path. The street was eerily quiet, the fog thickening with every step she took. She could barely see a few feet ahead of her, but the cat's frail form was unmistakable. It had collapsed on the sidewalk, its body shaking as it struggled to lift its head. Anna felt a surge of panic rise in her chest, but she pushed it down. She had to help. "Hey there," Anna whispered, approaching slowly, as if the cat were a fragile piece of glass. The tabby's ears flicked toward her, but it didn't move, its eyes dull with pain. Anna knelt beside it, her heart breaking at the sight of the helpless creature. She reached out a hand, her fingers trembling as she gently stroked the cat's fur. It didn't flinch, didn't retreat. Instead, it let out a soft, almost inaudible mew, a sound that spoke of fear, exhaustion, and an undeniable will to survive. Anna swallowed hard. She knew the cat was in desperate need of help, but how could she save it? Her parents would never allow her to bring it inside. They didn't approve of stray animals, no matter how much she begged. And yet, here it was, broken and vulnerable in front of her. She couldn't leave it like this. "Don't worry," she murmured softly. "I'll figure something out." With a final, hesitant glance at the cat's sad, pleading eyes, Anna made her decision. She carefully scooped the small creature into her arms, bringing it close to her chest. It was surprisingly light, and she could feel its tiny heart pounding against her own. She held her breath as she turned to head back toward her house, praying no one would see her. The last thing she needed was to get into trouble. The fog made it difficult to see, but Anna's determination pushed her forward. She didn't care about the risk. She didn't care about what her parents would say. All she cared about was getting the cat somewhere safe, somewhere it could rest and heal. As she hurried back toward her house, she kept her eyes peeled for any sign of danger, any threat to the fragile creature in her arms. The streets, once empty, were now alive with the distant sounds of cars and people. The tension in the air seemed to thicken with each passing second. As Anna neared her house, a loud screeching sound pierced the quiet morning. Her heart stopped as she turned to see a car speeding around the corner. The vehicle was coming too fast, its tires squealing as it hit a patch of wet road. The driver didn't see the little tabby, and the car was heading straight toward it. In that moment, Anna's mind went blank. She couldn't think. She couldn't process what was happening. The world seemed to slow down, the sound of the engine growing louder and louder in her ears. All she could see was the little cat, helpless on the road, unaware of the danger coming its way. Without thinking, she darted forward, pushing the cat down behind the nearest parked car, her body acting on pure instinct. The car zoomed past, the driver unaware of how close they had come to hitting the fragile creature. Anna's heart was racing, her breath coming in sharp gasps as she held the cat tightly against her chest. When she was sure the danger had passed, she pulled the cat back into her arms and quickly made her way to the front door. Her hands were shaking, but she couldn't stop now. Not when the cat's life depended on her. She took a deep breath, gathered her courage, and rang the doorbell. Her mother opened the door a moment later, looking at her with a mix of surprise and concern. "Anna, what is it?" she asked, her gaze falling to the small, trembling bundle in Anna's arms. "What do you have there?" Anna looked up at her mother, her eyes wide with fear and determination. I found this kitten. It's hurt. Please, Mom, I can't leave it out there." Her mother hesitated, her expression softening as she looked at the cat. After a long pause, she sighed and stepped aside, motioning for Anna to come in. "Come on then, let's see what we can do." As Anna stepped inside, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. The kitten was safe for now, but deep down, she knew this was just the beginning. There was no turning back now. She had made a choice to save this little life, and no matter what it took, she was going to see it through. Chapter 2. Fear and unexpected help. The soft pitter-patter of the rain against the windowsill created a gentle rhythm in the house, but inside, the air was thick with tension. Anna sat on the couch, the tiny kitten nestled in a soft towel in her lap. Her mother, Laura, had agreed to let the kitten stay, but only for a few hours, just long enough to assess the damage. It was a compromise Anna wasn't sure she could handle. She had to save it, but how? The kitten, whom Anna had decided to call Shadow, because of its dark, smoky gray fur, was small and fragile, no older than a few weeks. Its fur was damp from the rain, and Anna noticed that its hind leg was bent at an odd angle. The sight of the injury made her stomach churn. The poor thing was in pain, and she had no idea how to help it. Shadow's eyes were wide with fear, but they seemed to sparkle with something else, something resilient, something that told Anna that the kitten still had a fighting chance. But Anna didn't know how long that fight would last if it couldn't get proper care. She ran her fingers through the kitten's fur as gently as she could, trying to comfort it, but Shadow winced every time she touched its leg. She could feel the heat radiating from its small body. The kitten had a fever. "Mom," Anna said quietly, her voice trembling. "What should we do? I don't want it to die." Her mother looked over, her expression softening as she examined the little animal in Anna's arms. "We'll figure something out, honey. We just need to take care of it for now. We'll give it some food, some warmth, and see if it improves." But Anna wasn't sure that was enough. Shadow was so small, so delicate. She could already feel a growing knot in her chest, a gnawing sense of helplessness. What if it didn't get better? What if the injury was too severe? Her heart felt like it was being squeezed tightly with each thought. She felt a sudden weight on her lap as the kitten shifted, its tiny body curling into a ball. It seemed to trust Anna already, even though it had only just met her. She gently stroked its fur, trying to reassure it, but deep down, she knew the danger wasn't over. The kitten still had a long way to go, and she wasn't sure if it would make it. Just as Anna was lost in her thoughts, her mother stood up, pacing around the room. "You know what, Anna? I think we need to take it to the vet," Laura said suddenly. "It's the only way we can be sure it's going to survive." Anna's heart leapt. The vet, of course. That was the solution. But then the reality set in. "But we don't have the money for a vet. Dad's been out of work for a while, and we're already struggling." Her voice faltered, the fear creeping back in. Laura turned to face her, her eyes filled with a mix of concern and resolve. "We'll figure something out. You've done a good thing by saving this little guy. We can't suffer." Anna felt a spark of hope flicker in her chest. Her mother was right. They couldn't let Shadow suffer. She took a deep breath and nodded, her resolve strengthening. "Okay, Mom. Let's take it to the vet." The journey to the animal clinic wasn't easy. It was raining heavily now, the streets slick with water. Anna held Shadow close, the kitten's small body trembling against her. She could feel the heat of its fever through the towel, and the pain in her chest seemed to mirror the kitten's suffering. Every time she glanced down, Shadow's eyes were closed, but the twitching of its ears told her it was still aware of the world around it. The clinic was just a few blocks away, but the walk felt like a lifetime. Anna's heart raced as she walked beside her mother, barely able to concentrate on the world around her. All she could think about was the kitten. Would it survive? Was it too late? What if the vet couldn't help? When they finally arrived, they were greeted by a friendly receptionist who immediately noticed the state of the kitten. "Oh my," the receptionist murmured as she saw Shadow curled up in Anna's arms, barely moving. "You've brought a sick one in, haven't you? We'll take good care of it." Anna could only nod, her throat tight. She reluctantly handed Shadow over to the technician, her hands shaking as she let go of the kitten's small, fragile body. The wait in the clinic felt unbearable. Anna and her mother sat in the sterile waiting room, surrounded by the smell of antiseptic and the distant sounds of barking dogs and meowing cats. Time seemed to drag on, each minute stretching into eternity. Anna's mind was consumed with worry. What if the vet couldn't help? What if it was too late? Finally, after what felt like hours, a nurse appeared, holding the kitten in her arms. Anna's breath caught in her throat as she saw the little creature's eyes flutter open. Shadow was still alive. "The good news is that your kitten is stable," the vet said with a reassuring smile. "It's dehydrated, and its leg is badly sprained, but we think it will heal in time. We'll keep it here for observation overnight, and tomorrow we'll be able to send it home with you. For now, just make sure it gets plenty of rest and fluid." Anna felt a wave of relief wash over her. Shadow was going to make it. It wasn't too late. The kitten was going to survive, and she had helped save its life. "Thank you," Anna whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you so much." The vet smiled kindly. "You did the hard part, sweetheart. You saved this little one." As they left the clinic, Anna could barely contain the rush of emotions that flooded her. Relief, happiness, gratitude, but also a deep sense of responsibility. Shadow was now her responsibility, and she would do whatever it took to make sure the kitten recovered fully, no matter the cost, no matter the obstacles. This tiny, fragile creature had been through so much, and it was now up to her to make sure its future was bright. As Anna walked back home, her mother by her side, she couldn't help but smile. Shadow was going to be okay, and so was she. Because sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can lead to the most unexpected and life-changing adventures. Chapter 3. The Road to Recovery. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind the familiar scent of wet earth and freshly washed air. The streets shimmered under the pale glow of the streetlights, and Anna couldn't help but notice how the world had transformed after the storm. Everything felt so much more vibrant now, as if the clouds had lifted not just from the sky, but from her heart as well. Shadow had made it through the night, and Anna couldn't wait to bring the little kitten back home. As they walked back from the vet's office, Anna carried the kitten in her arms, wrapped carefully in a soft, clean towel. It was amazing how much calmer Shadow seemed now that it was in safer hands. Its eyes were no longer clouded with the fear and pain they had shown the day before. Instead, the kitten blinked slowly, as if trying to adjust to the world around it. Anna kept whispering softly to it, her voice full of reassurance, though she wasn't sure if Shadow understood the words. All she knew was that her presence seemed to soothe the tiny creature. By the time they reached home, the sun had started to set, casting a warm, golden light across the yard. The house, with its familiar walls and comforting warmth, suddenly felt like the perfect place for Shadow to rest and heal. As soon as they walked through the door, Anna rushed to her room, carefully setting the kitten down on a soft blanket by her bed. The small, fragile body curled up instinctively, and Anna could see its sides rising and falling slowly as it began to relax. It was so peaceful, now almost too peaceful after everything it had been through. Her mother followed her into the room, eyeing the kitten with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "Let's keep it here for now," she said gently, her voice calm but firm. "It's going to need a lot of care." Anna nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of joy and anxiety. She had saved this kitten, but now came the harder part, making sure Shadow would recover fully. Her mother had agreed to let the kitten stay, but only if they followed the vet's instructions carefully. They couldn't afford to make mistakes. For the next few days, Anna's life revolved around Shadow. Every morning, she would rush to her room to check on the little kitten, making sure it had eaten and that its leg wasn't getting worse. She carefully followed all the instructions the vet had given, them giving Shadow small amounts of water and food at regular intervals, making sure it stayed warm and keeping it in a quiet, comfortable place so it could rest. Shadow's progress, though slow, was encouraging. By the third day, it was moving around a bit more, though it still limped on its injured leg. Anna would sit by the blanket, watching the kitten with a mixture of concern and admiration. Shadow was so small, so delicate, and yet it had survived. It was a fighter, and Anna couldn't help but feel a sense of awe every time she saw the tiny creature struggle to get up, only to fall back down with a soft mew, determined to try again. Anna could feel her bond with the kitten growing stronger every day. She had always loved animals, but this was different. Shadow wasn't just an animal in need, a symbol of resilience, of hope. It had survived against the odds, and now, so had Anna. They were both healing, learning to trust again after a stormy beginning. One morning, after a week had passed, Anna sat on the floor next to the blanket, watching Shadow try to stand up again. The kitten had begun to show signs of real improvement. It was no longer shaking with fear or pain. Its little eyes gleamed with curiosity as it looked around the room, trying to get a better sense of its surroundings. The limping had become less pronounced, though it still favored its injured leg. Suddenly, Shadow attempted to stand, its small paws slipping a bit as it pushed itself up. Anna gasped in surprise, quickly reaching out to steady the kitten, but Shadow didn't need her help this time. It stood on its own, a small, triumphant mew escaping its lips. Anna's heart swelled with pride as she watched the kitten take a few wobbly steps forward. Shadow was walking. She leaned down, her voice soft but filled with excitement. "You did it," she whispered, her hands trembling with joy. "You're getting better." For the next few days, Anna continued to care for Shadow, but now with a new sense of hope. The kitten was no longer just surviving, it was thriving. Its appetite had improved, and it was more active, exploring the room with a newfound curiosity. Anna had begun to notice small, endearing details about the kitten's personality. Shadow was playful, swatting at her fingers whenever she extended them too close, but also incredibly affectionate, curling up on Anna's lap when it was tired, purring softly in contentment. But just when Anna thought everything was settling into a routine, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, Anna was outside in the garden, picking flowers for a vase in the kitchen. She had left the door to her room open, allowing Shadow to wander freely around the house. It was a small, harmless indulgence after all. The kitten was well enough to roam. But when Anna returned to her room, she was greeted by chaos. The blanket on the floor was empty. The room, which had been so carefully organized, was now a mess of overturned books and scattered toys. Anna's heart skipped a beat. Where was Shadow? She rushed through the house, calling the kitten's name, but there was no answer. Panic began to rise in her chest, her breath shallow as she searched every corner of the house. What had happened? Had Shadow run off? Or worse, had something happened to it again? The house felt eerily silent, as if all the air had been sucked out of it. Then, just as Anna was about to lose hope, she heard the faintest sound, a soft, pitiful mew. She rushed to the living room, where she found Shadow, stuck under the couch, its tiny body wedged between the cushions. Relief flooded over Anna as she carefully slid the couch aside and gently pulled the kitten free. Shadow mewed in discomfort, but there was no sign of injury, just a little scared and a bit tangled. Anna let out a shaky laugh, her fingers brushing through Shadow's fur as she lifted it into her arms. "It's okay," Anna whispered, rocking the kitten gently. "You're safe. You're always safe with me." She sat on the couch, cuddling the little kitten close, a sense of calm finally returning. Despite everything, despite the fear and the uncertainty, Shadow had survived, and Anna had helped it every step of the way. It wasn't just about rescuing a helpless kitten anymore. It was about protecting a life, fighting for it, and realizing that sometimes the hardest battles were the ones that taught you the most about strength, compassion, and hope. Anna looked down at Shadow, and the kitten gazed back up at her with those wide, bright eyesides that spoke of trust, of an unspoken promise. No matter what happened next, they had each other. And that was all that mattered. Chapter 4. the storm before the calm. The days following Shadow's small but significant victory felt like a soft hum of hope. The kitten continued to improve, moving more freely around Anna's room, batting playfully at toys, and curling up on her lap during every spare moment. The bond between them deepened with each passing day. Anna had never expected such a connection, but now the kitten was more than just a pet. Shadow had become her companion, her responsibility, in many ways her strength. However, the sense of calm Anna had come to cherish was fragile. A new storm that had nothing to do with the weather was brewing on the horizon. It started with small things that Anna didn't think much about at first. Shadow's playful antics became slightly less frequent, and the kitten started to retreat to the quiet corners of Anna's room, curling up more often than usual. At first, Anna assumed it was just a sign of recovery that the kitten was simply exhausted from all the activity of getting better. But as the days passed, the change in Shadow's behavior became more noticeable. Shadow was no longer eating as much, and it had stopped drinking water as frequently. Anna noticed that the kitten's eyes seemed duller than before, a stark contrast to the bright, curious gaze it had once had. Her heart sank as she observed the change. Was Shadow getting worse again? Something gone wrong with its recovery? The thought made her stomach churn with fear. The turning point came one evening, when Anna found Shadow curled up under the bed, barely moving. At first, she thought the kitten was just sleeping, but when she tried to coax it out, there was no response. Anna's pulse quickened as she reached out, gently lifting the kitten into her arms. It felt unnaturally warm, and its body was limp, as if it didn't have the strength to react to her touch. "Shadow?" Anna whispered urgently, her voice trembling. Please don't." A sense of dread washed over her, an overwhelming sense of helplessness she hadn't felt since that first day when she found the kitten outside in the storm. She immediately rushed to her mother, her voice panicked. "Mom, something's wrong. Shadow isn't moving. It's really sick." Her mother came quickly, but even her calm demeanor couldn't reassure Anna. The sight of the kitten in her arms weak, lethargic, and feverish made both of them freeze in place. "We need to take it to the vet again," Laura said firmly, though her voice was tinged with worry. "It's the only option. If we wait, it could get worse." Without hesitation, Anna bundled Shadow back into the towel, her hands shaking as she made sure the kitten was secure. The clinic was a short drive away, but it felt like hours as they rushed through the empty streets, the tension in the air thickening with every passing minute. Anna couldn't stop thinking about how much Shadow had already been through. It was only a few days ago that she had been so hopeful, watching the kitten walk, seeing it regain its strength. She had dared to believe that everything would be okay. But now, the reality was much harsher. The kitten had regressed, and Anna didn't know what to do. She could barely keep herself from crying, but she had to stay strong. Shadow needed her. When they arrived at the clinic, the receptionist immediately ushered them in. They didn't have to wait long before a technician came to take Shadow into the back. Anna stayed in the lobby with her mother, feeling every second of the weight in her chest. Her mind raced with fear. What was wrong with the kitten? Was it going to make it this time? Minutes felt like hours as they sat in silence. Every time Anna looked at the clock, it seemed as if the hands hadn't moved at all. Her thoughts spiraled, and all she could do was clutch her hands together tightly in her lap, praying for the worst not to happen. Finally, the vet came into the waiting room, her face serious, but not quite as grim as Anna had feared. "It's not as bad as we thought," she said gently, though her words didn't come without concern. "Shadow's condition is complicated, but it's still possible for the kitten to recover. It looks like it has a severe infection, which is why it's been so lethargic and refusing to eat." Anna's breath caught in her throat. "An infection? How did that happen? Is it my fault?" The vet shook her head, placing a hand on Anna's shoulder. "No, sweetheart. It's not your fault. The infection likely came from its injury, and without proper treatment, it can cause these symptoms. But we caught it in time. With the right medication, Shadow should start feeling better soon." Anna let out a shaky breath of relief. The weight on her chest, the suffocating fear that had been threatening to swallow her whole, lifted slightly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice still filled with worry, but also a glimmer of hope. "We'll keep Shadow here overnight," the vet continued. "We want to monitor it closely, but you should be able to bring it home tomorrow. Just make sure you follow the medication instructions carefully, and it'll be on the road to recovery soon." That night, Anna barely slept. She kept imagining Shadow in the clinic, lying in a cage, alone. What if it was scared? What if it was too weak to fight the infection on its own? Anna had promised to protect Shadow, but now she felt as though she was failing. She didn't even want to think about what would happen if the kitten didn't make it. The thought was too painful to bear. The next morning, when she returned to the clinic, her heart pounded in her chest as she waited for the technician to bring Shadow back to her. When the kitten was finally placed in her arms, she was overwhelmed with relief. Shadow's eyes were still tired, but they were clearer than before, and the heat that had radiated from its body was no longer as intense. It was still fragile, still recovering, but Anna could feel the strength returning. As she left the clinic with the kitten wrapped securely in her arms, she couldn't stop herself from crying. It wasn't just tears of relief, though. It was a mix of everything. Relief, fear, and love, all intertwined. Shadow wasn't out of the woods yet, but Anna was willing to fight for it, just as the kitten had fought for its own life. She had already seen Shadow's strength. And now, it was her turn to show hers. The road ahead would still be difficult, and there would be more challenges to face. But for now, Anna knew one thing for certain. Shadow wasn't giving up, and neither would she. The storm that had threatened to tear them apart was over, and all that was left was the calm, the promise of a better future. They had come this far, and they would keep going together. Chapter 5. A Light in the Dark. The days that followed Shadow's return from the vet were filled with a mixture of cautious optimism and lingering fear. The kitten was still weak, still recovering, but it was obvious that the medication was working. It was a slow process, and Anna knew that she had to remain vigilant. There could be no slip-ups, no carelessness, not when it came to Shadow's health. She was determined to see the kitten through this, no matter how difficult it might get. The house, once filled with the constant hum of daily life, now revolved around the fragile life of the little kitten. Shadow's world was small for the moment. The soft blanket on the floor, the warm corner by Anna's bed, the quiet room where the only sounds were the occasional mews or the gentle purring of a contented kitten. Anna's mother had set up a special feeding schedule for the kitten, with frequent small meals to help it regain its strength. At first, Shadow had resisted the food, refusing to eat more than a bite here and there. But Anna was patient, coaxing the kitten with soft words, gently placing the food near its mouth, and encouraging it to take a little more each time. Slowly, Shadow began to eat more eagerly, its tiny body seeming to soak up the nourishment like a sponge. There was a sense of quiet determination in the air now. Every little sign of progress was a victory. Every time Shadow managed to take a few steps without limping, Anna's heart swelled with pride. Every time the kitten curled up in her lap, purring softly, she felt a deep sense of connection to the fragile creature she had rescued. She wasn't just caring for Shadow, she was helping it find its way back to life, to safety, and to love. But just as Anna began to let herself believe that things might return to normal, a new challenge presented itself. One evening, after Shadow had spent the day playing and exploring Anna's room, it suddenly stopped in its tracks, staring at the door. Its small body went rigid, its ears perked up, and its eyes widened in alarm. Anna froze as well, looking toward the door, unsure of what had caught the kitten's attention. The sound that followed made her blood run cold, a loud, heavy knock on the door. Anna's heart skipped a beat. Her mother had mentioned that someone might be coming over. She hadn't expected it to happen so soon. The knock was followed by the sound of footsteps, quick, heavy, and purposeful. "Mom?" Anna whispered, looking toward the hallway. Her mother's face appeared at the door, her expression serious. "Anna, stay here," she said firmly. "I need to talk to them." Before Anna could respond, her mother was gone, leaving her alone with the quiet tension of the room. Shadow was still alert, its tiny body trembling slightly as it watched the door, as if sensing the change in the atmosphere. Minutes later, Anna heard Voicessa low conversation she couldn't quite make out. Something in her gut told her that whatever was happening on the other side of that door was good. A sense of dread settled over her. She tried to focus on Shadow, to calm her racing thoughts by petting the kitten's soft fur, but it wasn't working. The feeling of unease only grew stronger with each passing moment. Finally, the door to her room creaked open, and Anna's mother appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Anna could feel the tension radiating off her. "Mom?" she asked cautiously, standing up from the floor. "What's going on?" Her mother didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. She looked at Anna, her gaze filled with a mix of worry and something Anna couldn't quite read. "It's the landlord," her mother said quietly. "They've decided to raise the rent, and we can't afford it anymore." Anna's heart sank. She had known that money was tight, but she hadn't realized how bad it had become. Her mother had always shielded her from the worst of it, but now the reality of their situation was hitting hard. The tears that had been threatening to break free suddenly burned behind her eyes. Her mother's voice trembled slightly. "We might have to move, Anna. I don't know how we'll manage, but we'll figure something out. We always do." The words felt like a punch to Anna's chest. Move? After everything they had been through? After Shadow had fought so hard to survive? The thought of uprooting their lives, leaving the only home Anna had ever known, was unbearable. And yet, she knew her mother was right. If they couldn't afford the rent, there was no other choice. Anna didn't know what to say. She looked down at Shadow, who had begun to mewl softly in her arms, as if sensing the change in the atmosphere. The kitten's tiny voice was a stark contrast to the heaviness of the conversation. For a moment, Anna could only hold Shadow close, letting the warmth of the kitten's body against hers soothe her raw nerves. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the overwhelming sense of loss that threatened to swallow her whole. "I won't let anything happen to you, Shadow," she whispered, more to herself than to the kitten. "I'll take care of you, I promise." The days that followed were a blur. Anna and her mother packed what little they could, sorting through their things and trying to find a way to make ends meet. It felt like their entire world was unraveling, bit by bit. Shadow, though still weak, had become a source of comfort for Anna. Each time she looked at the little kitten, she was reminded of how far they had come, how much strength they both had. But as the days grew darker and their situation became more uncertain, Anna found herself questioning everything. How could they move? Where could they go? Could they still afford the care that Shadow needed, especially with the uncertainty surrounding their future? One night, as Anna sat by the window, staring out into the darkened sky, a soft mewl broke through her thoughts. She turned to find Shadow on the floor, its tiny body moving awkwardly but determinedly toward her. The kitten stumbled but kept going, its eyes locked on Anna, its steps unsteady but filled with purpose. Anna smiled softly, her heart swelling with pride. In that moment, she realized something. Shadow was showing her the way. No matter what obstacles they faced, they would keep moving forward, one step at a time. Together. The world around them might be uncertain, but as long as they had each other, there was hope. And no matter what came next, Anna knew she would do whatever it took to ensure that Shadow would have a Futura safe, happy future. With a deep breath, Anna reached down and gently scooped up the kitten, holding it close to her chest. The storm outside raged on, but within the walls of their home, in the warmth of their bond, there was peace. "We'll be okay, Shadow," Anna whispered, feeling the steady beat of the kitten's tiny heart against her own. "We'll be okay." And for the first time in days, Anna believed it. Chapter 6. The Road to Recovery. The days following the difficult conversation with her mother seemed to drag on, but as Anna watched Shadow continue to grow stronger, something deep inside her sparked a quiet, unwavering determination. The uncertainty of their situation loomed over them like a dark cloud, but Anna wasn't going to let it consume her. Not when she had Shadow to care for. Not when the little kitten had already shown so much resilience. Even in the face of uncertainty, the tiny creature, once so frail and fragile, was now beginning to regain its playful spirit. Shadow still wasn't quite as active as it had been before the illness, but the little kitten was making steady progress. Its eyes were clearer, and the dullness that had once clouded them was now replaced by that same sharp, inquisitive gleam. Shadow's fur, once ragged and thin, was starting to look soft and plush again. The transformation was slow, but it was there, and it filled Anna with a sense of relief and hope. One afternoon, as Anna sat in the living room working on her homework, Shadow came up to her, its small paws patting softly across the carpet. The kitten's movements were still uncoordinated, but there was a newfound energy in the way it approached Anna. It nuzzled against her legs, purring softly, and for the first time in what felt like weeks, Anna allowed herself to relax. "Hey there, little one," she whispered, reaching down to scoop Shadow up into her arms. She held the kitten close to her chest, marveling at how warm and soft it felt against her. The purring was louder now, a sign that Shadow was finally beginning to feel comfortable again, to trust that it was safe. Anna closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the moment wash over her. Shadow had been through so much, and yet here it was, still fighting, still pushing forward. But even as she savored this moment, Anna knew that the journey wasn't over. Shadow still had a long road ahead of it before it was fully recovered, and Anna, too, had her own battles to face. The prospect of moving, of leaving the only home she had ever known, still hung heavy over her, though she didn't dare speak of it. The next day, Anna decided to take Shadow outside for a little walk, something she hadn't done in weeks. She gently wrapped the kitten in a soft towel to keep it warm, though the spring air was still cool. The sun was shining brightly, and Anna could feel the weight of the past few days begin to lift as she stepped outside into the fresh air. The world seemed so much bigger now, stretching out before her in a way it hadn't before. Shadow's tiny body squirmed slightly in Anna's arms as they walked down the front steps, but it settled quickly, seemingly content to be outside. The cool breeze ruffled the kitten's fur, and Anna couldn't help but smile. She knew it was important to let Shadow stretch its legs, to get some fresh air, and a taste of the outside world again. It had spent so many days inside, confined by its recovery. As they walked around the yard, Anna felt a sense of peace that she hadn't known in weeks. She was finally able to breathe without the constant pressure of worry sitting heavy in her chest. The sun warmed her face, and she allowed herself to close her eyes for a moment, soaking in the tranquility. Shadow, too, seemed to enjoy the calm. The kitten's tiny meows were soft but insistent, as if it was exploring the world in its own way, discovering new sights and smells, even if only in the small yard surrounding their home. But as they wandered near the back fence, Shadow suddenly froze, its ears flattening against its head. Anna stopped in her tracks, instinctively pulling the kitten closer to her chest. A rustling sound broke the silence. Anna's heart raced as she scanned the yard, searching for the source of the noise. It wasn't the wind. It was something else, something closer. Then she saw it. A figure just beyond the fence, moving slowly, deliberately. For a moment, Anna didn't know what to do. The stranger was too far away to see clearly, but something about the way they moved, the way they lingered near the property line, sent a chill down Anna's spine. Shadow, still tense in her arms, growled softly, a sound so small and fierce that it startled her. Anna's pulse quickened. Should she call for her mother? Should she run inside with Shadow and lock the door? The decision seemed to hang in the air, suspended, while her mind raced to make sense of the situation. Just as the figure began to move toward the gate, there was a sharp bark from the neighbor's dog. The man, it was a man, paused for a moment before turning quickly and disappearing behind the trees. Anna couldn't quite make out the details of his face, but she knew enough to be afraid. Something didn't feel right. Her hands trembled as she gently set Shadow down on the grass. The kitten's claws scratched at the ground as it adjusted itself, but it didn't wander too far. Anna knelt down beside it, carefully watching the gate, waiting for any sign of movement. It took a moment before the adrenaline began to ebb, and she realized just how tightly she had been holding her breath. That was close, Anna whispered to herself, trying to calm the panic that had risen in her chest. Her thoughts were jumbled. Who was that? What were they doing here? But before she could dwell on it any longer, she heard her mother's voice calling from the front door. "Anna! Shadow! Come inside!" The urgency in her mother's voice sent Anna into motion. She scooped Shadow up quickly and hurried back toward the house. Her mother was standing at the door, her face pale and tense. "Did you see him?" Anna asked, her voice shaking slightly as she approached. Her mother didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked toward the fence, scanning the yard as if to reassure herself that nothing had changed. "I saw him too," her mother said, her voice quiet but firm. "You were right to come back inside. That man was hanging around for a while, but when I saw him, he left quickly. I think we've got to be extra careful for a while. He's not someone we know." Anna nodded, her heart still racing. She hadn't expected something like this to happen, not today, not when everything seemed to finally be going right. but she knew better than to ignore the warning signs. It wasn't the first time something strange had happened around their house, but it felt different this time. Something was off. For the rest of the day, the unease lingered in the air. Anna stayed close to Shadow, keeping it indoors, while her mother took precautions locking doors, checking the windows, and ensuring everything was secure. Anna had thought she was out of danger, that the storm of uncertainty and fear had passed. But now, with this new threat, she realized that there would always be challenges in their way. She couldn't let her guard down, not now, not when so much was at stake. Still, even in the face of danger, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. They had survived so much already. They had found each other amidst the chaos and had fought together step by step to build something that was stronger than the forces trying to tear them apart. Shadow was still alive, still fighting, and so was she. And no matter what came next, Anna knew one thing for certain. She would protect Shadow with everything she had, and she would keep moving forward. Chapter 7. Unseen Shadows. The days that followed the strange encounter near the fence were filled with an anxious tension that seemed to settle deep into the bones of the house. Even though Anna and her mother tried to go about their daily routines, the underlying sense of unease was impossible to shake. The man whoever he was had left, but the lingering feeling that someone was watching them had not dissipated. Anna had always been able to trust her instincts, and now, more than ever, they screamed at her to be cautious. Despite the unease, life, as it tends to do, moved forward. Shadow's recovery was a slow but steady process, and Anna had become accustomed to the quiet rhythm of caring for the kitten. Each day, there were small victories. Shadow playing with a toy for longer stretches of time, eating more eagerly, curling up in Anna's lap and purring louder, as if to reassure them both that it was getting stronger. Anna spent hours beside Shadow, feeling the steady beat of the kitten's heart against her palms as it dozed in her lap. It was in these moments that Anna could forget about the worry, the unknowns that swirled around them, and just focus on the tiny creature she had come to love so deeply. But the events outside the yard seemed to follow them like a shadow. One evening, as Anna and her mother prepared dinner, a knock on the door startled them both. The unexpected sound was enough to send a jolt of panic through Anna's chest. She had been so preoccupied with everything else, the threat from the man, the challenges they were facing, that she had almost allowed herself to forget how vulnerable they really were. The knock echoed through the small house, making the hairs on the back of Anna's neck stand on end. Her mother glanced at her quickly, before walking to the door. "Stay back, Anna," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Anna's heart was racing as she stepped into the hallway, her eyes darting to Shadow, who was curled up on the couch. The kitten's ears perked up at the sound of the knock, and its eyes widened slightly, but it didn't move. Anna couldn't help but wonder if Shadow, too, could sense the tension in the air. She stood frozen, waiting for her mother to return. When the door finally creaked open, Anna couldn't hear the words that were exchanged, but she saw the brief flash of a face in the doorway, a man. Not the same one she had seen earlier, but still a stranger. Anna's heart skipped a beat as she peered around the corner, her curiosity getting the better of her. The man looked ordinary and nautical, with short-cropped hair and a polite demeanor, but something about him set Anna's nerves on edge. He was holding a letter, his eyes focused on her mother, with a mixture of concern and business-like detachment. Her mother's face was unreadable, but Anna could see the way her shoulders tensed, the way her gaze flickered to the floor before meeting the man's eyes. The conversation was brief, and before long, the man turned and walked away, leaving the door slightly ajar. Anna waited for her mother to return, but when she did, her face was pale, and her eyes were distant. "Who was that?" Anna asked, her voice laced with worry. Her mother hesitated before speaking. "It was the landlord's assistant. He brought a letter. It's from the bank, Anna. We need to make sure the rent is paid by the end of the week. Or we may have to move sooner than we thought." The weight of the words settled heavily on Anna's shoulders. The reality of their situation was getting worse by the day. It wasn't just the threat of losing their home, it was the looming uncertainty of not knowing where they would go, what would happen to them, and whether they could keep everything together. The world felt like it was closing in on them, and Anna couldn't understand why everything had to fall apart at once. "I'm trying, Anna," her mother said softly, reaching out to touch her shoulder. "I'm doing everything I can." But despite her mother's reassurances, Anna could see the strain in her eyes, the exhaustion that had only deepened in the past few weeks. The pressure was mounting, and Anna knew that she couldn't just sit back and let it all happen. She had to do something to help. That night, after dinner, Anna couldn't sleep. Her thoughts raced, the weight of their situation pressing on her chest like a stone. She kept thinking about Shadow, the little kitten that had fought so hard to survive. She thought about the tenderness with which she held the tiny creature, the soft purring that had once been so faint but now reverberated through her entire body. Shadow had become her anchor, her source of comfort in the midst of chaos. Anna couldn't bear the thought of losing that. The moonlight streamed in through the window, casting shadows across the floor. Anna lay awake, her mind whirling, until something in the quiet dark made her sit up. She heard its soft padding noises, a faint scratching sound, almost as if something were moving outside. Her heart lurched in her chest. Not again. She slipped out of bed as quietly as she could, careful not to disturb her mother, who was already asleep. Shadow stirred slightly in its sleep, but didn't wake. Anna crept over to the window and peered through the blinds. Nothing. There was nothing outside, just the shadows of the trees swaying in the breeze. Yet the sound lingered, as though it had been real, as though something was hiding just out of sight. Anna's mind raced again. Who was it? Was it the same man from before? Or was it someone else? The anxiety was so thick it felt almost suffocating. She stood frozen at the window, feeling the pull of something far more dangerous than the uncertainty of her family's situation. A cold shiver ran down her spine. There was a subtle movement by the gate. She could just make out the shape of something crouching in the shadows, half hidden by the thick foliage. Anna's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't imagined it. The seconds ticked by, and her hands gripped the windowsill as she tried to steady herself. The figure shifted slightly, and Anna could see, just for a split second, a flash of movement. It wasn't a person. It wasn't a shadow. It was something small, something darting out of the darkness, and then quickly retreating back again. Her pulse quickened. Could it be another animal? Could it be something threatening Shadow? Without thinking, Anna grabbed her jacket and rushed outside, determined to get a closer look. Her instincts screamed at her to stay inside, but her fear for Shadow, the overwhelming need to protect it, spurred her forward. She couldn't let anything happen to the kitten now, not when it had come so far. The night air was cold and crisp as she stepped outside. The yard felt different in the darkness, more ominous. Her footsteps were muffled by the grass as she made her way toward the gate. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. But something else had changed. Anna could feel it, deep in her bones. The presence that had once felt like a distant worry was now too close for comfort. And somewhere, in the dark, Anna knew that the true danger had only just begun. Chapter 8. The Edge of Fear. The next few days felt like a blur, each moment tinged with the lingering sense of danger that had come so abruptly into their lives. Anna couldn't shake the feeling that something was closing in around them. The small, quiet house once, a place of comfort now, felt suffocating. Every creak in the floorboards, every shift in the wind, set her on edge. She tried to focus on Shadow, to keep the kitten's recovery on track. But even the soft purring of the little creature couldn't quell the growing anxiety in Anna's chest. Her mother noticed the change in her, but Anna kept her worries to herself. Her mother already had enough to deal with facing the mounting pressures of bills and the looming threat of eviction. Anna couldn't burden her further. Instead, she spent hours each day with Shadow, caring for the kitten and keeping it close. The bond between them had only deepened in the past few weeks. Anna was Shadow's protector, and in a strange way, Shadow had become her anchor in the storm. But no matter how much she tried to protect Shadow, there were things Anna couldn't control. The knock on the door that afternoon was a reminder of that. Her heart leaped into her throat when the sound came again this time, louder and more insistent. Anna froze, her hand halfway to the doorknob before she realized she was holding her breath. This time, there was no delay. Her mother quickly crossed the room to answer, her eyes wary and guarded. The man standing on the doorstep was not the same stranger who had arrived before. He was older, his graying hair giving him an air of authority that Anna immediately found unsettling. He wore a dark coat, his hands clasped in front of him. His expression was unreadable as he looked past Anna's mother and into the house, as though searching for something for someone. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm sorry to intrude. I'm here on behalf of the property management company." Anna's mother stiffened, but she nodded. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice measured but laced with concern. The man glanced over his shoulder, as if to make sure no one was listening. "There are some concerns about your property," he said quietly. "We've received reports of disturbances. People have been talking about strange activity in the area. We need to make sure everything is in order." Disturbances. Anna felt a chill run through her. What did he mean? What kind of disturbances? She couldn't help but feel like the world outside was closing in tighter, its edges becoming sharper, more threatening. Her mother's face darkened. "Is this about the man I saw? The one by the fence?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced over Anna's shoulder, as if to gauge how much they had overheard. "I'm afraid so," he said after a long pause. "We've been informed of some unusual activity in the neighborhood, and we want to ensure that everyone in this area is safe." Anna's heart hammered in her chest. What was he saying? What was happening? The man stepped back, raising a hand in a placating gesture. "I'm not here to cause any trouble," he continued, his voice still calm. "I'm just making sure everything is secure. I'll be in touch soon." With that, he turned and left, disappearing down the driveway before Anna or her mother could ask any more questions. Anna's mind was racing. Disturbances? What kind of disturbances? The man's cryptic words didn't sit right with her. She had already known that their lives had taken an unpredictable turn, but this new development made everything feel even more fragile. The walls of their house suddenly felt thinner, as if the outside world had breached their sanctuary. Her mother closed the door and leaned against it, her hands shaking slightly. Anna could see the fear in her eyes, the way her mother struggled to maintain composure. "I don't know who to trust anymore," her mother murmured. "I don't know what's happening in this place." Anna stood in the hallway, her pulse still racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that something far more dangerous was on the horizon. But what could they do? They couldn't just leave, they didn't have anywhere else to go. As if sensing the weight of the moment, Shadow appeared at Anna's feet, looking up at her with wide, expectant eyes. The kitten let out a small mew, its voice soft and tentative. Anna crouched down to scoop Shadow up into her arms, the warmth of the kitten's body soothing the edge of her nerves. "I'll protect you," Anna whispered softly, her voice filled with resolve. "No one's going to hurt you." But the truth was, she didn't know how much longer she could protect them. The danger was no longer just a vague feeling. It was real, and it was closing in faster than she could keep up with. The days passed in a haze of worry, each one blending into the next. Every time Anna went outside with Shadow, she felt the tension in the air, as if someone or something was watching them from the shadows. The fear had become so all-encompassing that Anna could barely bring herself to enjoy the little moments of peace that came with caring for Shadow. Even the kitten's playful antics, which had once filled her with joy, now felt like fleeting distractions from the darkness that hung over them. Then, late one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the house was shrouded in the thick darkness of night, Anna felt it again, a sense of something wrong, something out of place. The familiar quiet of the neighborhood had been replaced by a subtle but palpable tension. Every rustle of the trees, every distant noise, seemed to amplify silence. And then it happened. A knock. Not the usual soft rap on the door, but something more insistent, more forceful. Anna's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't imagining it this time. She glanced at her mother, who had frozen in place, her face drained of color. They both knew what this could mean. Anna's breath caught in her throat, and she quickly grabbed Shadow, holding the kitten close to her chest. Her mother slowly walked to the door, but she didn't open it. Instead, she peered through the peephole, her face becoming more drawn by the second. "Who is it?" Anna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her mother's response was strained, her words tight with fear. "It's him, the man from before." Anna's stomach twisted into knots. She could feel the weight of the moment pressed down on her chest, suffocating her. The knock came again, louder this time, demanding to be answered. "Don't open the door," Anna said urgently, her voice trembling. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that this was no longer just about their house or the neighborhood. It was about something darker, something more dangerous than either of them had imagined. Her mother's eyes locked onto hers for a long moment, the fear evident in her gaze. Then, slowly, she turned away from the door. "We're not opening it," she said firmly, her voice steady, though her hands were still trembling. Anna held her breath as the knock came once more, louder and more forceful, like the pounding of a heart in the darkness. The night stretched on, and everything felt suspended in time. Somewhere, just beyond the door, the danger was waiting. Chapter 9. Beneath the Surface. The night dragged on like a slow, suffocating tide, the weight of the silence almost unbearable. Anna clutched Shadow tightly, the kitten's small body vibrating gently in her arms. The knock had stopped, but the tension hung in the air like a thick fog. Every sound, the creak of the house settling, the rustle of the trees, outseemed, amplified, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Anna's mind raced, torn between fear and a deep, instinctive need to protect the only family she had left. Her mother was standing across the room, her back against the door, her face pale with fear. She hadn't said a word since the knock, and Anna knew she was trying to figure out what to do next. The silence between them was more suffocating than any words could be. "Mom," Anna whispered, her voice barely audible. She didn't want to break the stillness, but she had to ask. "What are we going to do?" Her mother didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned slowly and met Anna's gaze, her eyes filled with a mix of worry and exhaustion. "I don't know, Anna," she said quietly, her voice hoarse. "But we have to be careful. It's not just about us anymore." The weight of those words hit Anna like a stone. Her mother's fears, the warning in her voice, it was all so much bigger than she had realized. This wasn't just about their home or the uncertainty of their future. It was something deeper, something that had been creeping into their lives from the moment Anna found Shadow by the fence. And now, she could feel it closing in, inch by painful inch. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching longer than the last. Outside, the night remained unnervingly quiet, as if the world were waiting for something to snap. But nothing came. The danger that had been so tangible just moments before seemed to hang in the air, elusive and impossible to pin down. Anna slowly placed Shadow back on the couch, the kitten letting out a soft mew of protest. She didn't want to leave it alone, but there was something inside her that told her they needed to know more. They couldn't just hide away and hope for the best. They had to understand what was happening, what they were really up against. "Stay here," she whispered to Shadow, before slowly creeping toward the door. She stood still for a moment, her hand resting on the cool wood of the door, feeling the steady beat of her heart in her chest. Was it really the same man? The one who had come to the door before? Or was there someone else involved now? She didn't know, and the uncertainty gnawed at her. It felt like there was a larger, hidden force at work, one that was watching them from the shadows. Taking a deep breath, she cracked the door open, just enough to peek through the crack. Her eyes scanned the porch, but the figure from before was gone. There was no sign of him, no shadow moving in the night. But something was off. The air felt thicker than before, almost oppressive, as if something had changed in the stillness of the night. Anna's eyes moved across the yard, the flickering porch light casting long shadows on the ground. Her gaze lingered on the gate, where she had seen the figure hiding in the darkness earlier. For a moment, she thought she saw movement, just at the edge of her vision, but when she focused on the spot, there was nothing there. Was it her imagination? Or was there truly someone watching? She closed the door gently, trying to remain as quiet as possible, though the soft click of the latch seemed unnervingly loud in the stillness. Her heart was pounding in her chest, her mind whirling with questions she couldn't answer. She didn't know what she had seen or if she had seen anything at all. But she knew one thing. The danger was real, and it was closing in. Anna turned back to her mother, who was standing near the window. Her eyes narrowed as she gazed out into the night. "What if this is about more than just us?" Anna asked, her voice tight with worry. "What if someone else is involved?" Her mother didn't immediately answer, but Anna could see the weight of the question in her eyes. She knew that, deep down, her mother was feeling the same sense of helplessness, the feeling that they were caught in something much bigger than they could control. "We need to keep moving forward," her mother said finally, her voice quiet but resolute. "We have to keep our focus on what we can do, Anna. We can't let fear take over." Anna nodded, though doubt still churned in her stomach. It was so hard to stay focused on the small things, the day-to-day survival, when everything around them felt like it was unraveling. But her mother was right, fear couldn't take control. They had to keep fighting, no matter how uncertain the road ahead might be. Suddenly, the sound of Shadow, mewing loudly from the other room, broke the silence, cutting through the tension like a sharp knife. Anna's breath caught in her throat. She knew something was wrong. The urgency in the kitten's cry was unmistakable. "Shadow," Anna whispered, her heart racing again. She was already moving toward the sound, her feet pounding against the floor. What was happening? Why was Shadow so scared? She reached the living room and found the kitten standing on the couch, its fur bristling and its body tense, eyes wide with fear. The normally playful little creature seemed completely still, its ears flattened against its head. Shadow let out another frightened mew, its tiny body trembling. Anna's first instinct was to pick the kitten up and comfort it. But before she could take another step, the house was rocked by a loud, sharp noise, something hitting the window with a sudden force. The impact made the glass rattle in its frame, and Anna's heart leaped into her throat. Her mother rushed into the room, her eyes wide with alarm. "What was that?" she demanded, her voice tight with fear. Anna's mind was racing. The noise, it wasn't just a random accident. It was intentional. Something had struck the window, and whoever or whatever it wasn't leaving them alone. Anna glanced at the window, but she couldn't see anything outside. It was as though the shadow had been deliberately cast across their lives, and now it was becoming impossible to ignore. "We need to leave," Anna's mother said suddenly, her voice low and urgent. "We can't stay here anymore. Not with this happening." Anna froze. Leave? Where would they go? How could they just walk away from everything they had left? But deep down, she knew that her mother was right. They were no longer safe. Whatever this threat was, it was real, and it wasn't going to stop until it had them cornered. Anna took a deep breath, her mind racing. She glanced at Shadow, still trembling in the corner of the couch, and knew in that moment that she would do anything to keep the kitten and her family safe. "Let's go," she said, her voice trembling but determined. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she began to move, the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. But no matter what happened, Anna was ready to face it. She had to protect those she loved, no matter the cost. Chapter 10. The Final Stand. The night seemed to stretch out endlessly, its dark expanse pressing down on Anna and her mother. With every step they took, the world outside felt more hostile, more oppressive. The house, once a haven of safety, now seemed like a trap, its walls closing in, its silence becoming unbearable. Shadow, trembling in Anna's arms, could feel the fear in the air, and Anna held the kitten closer, whispering comforting words she wasn't sure either of them believed. Her mother's hand gripped her own as they moved through the house, silently navigating the familiar rooms that now seemed foreign, alien. They had no plan, no clear idea of what to do next. But they both knew that staying wasn't an option. They couldn't wait for whatever danger lurking outside to make its move. They had to act. Outside, the night was still and heavy, the streetlights casting long, pale shadows on the pavement. The quiet was almost suffocating, but there was no time to dwell on the silence. Anna and her mother moved swiftly, their footsteps muffled against the cold ground. They were leaving everything behind: their home, their memories, the life they had known. It was all slipping through their fingers, and Anna felt the weight of it with every step. But as they reached the gate, the first real sense of urgency washed over Anna. She felt it deep in her bones, the unmistakable feeling that something was watching them. The shadows shifted, as if alive, and for the briefest of moments, Anna swore she saw a figure moving just beyond the edge of the yard. Her heart leaped into her throat, and she instinctively pulled her mother back toward the house. "Mom, we can't," she whispered, her voice trembling. "There's someone out there." Her mother turned, her face pale with fear. "We have to go, Anna," she said, her voice shaking. "We can't stay here anymore. We've already lost too much." The tension in the air was palpable, thickening with every breath Anna took. It felt as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then, just as the moment became unbearable, it came a flash of movement, swift and sudden, darting out from the shadows. Anna's heart slammed into her chest. It wasn't just a figure, it was a person. And they were moving toward them with purpose. "Run!" her mother screamed, and the word tore through the night like a siren, a desperate command that made Anna's blood run cold. Without thinking, They turned and fled, running toward the street as fast as they could. The cold night air burned in their lungs, the sound of their footsteps pounding on the pavement seeming impossibly loud in the silence. Shadow squirmed in Anna's arms, and she held the kitten tighter, desperate to protect it, to keep it safe. They reached the end of the driveway, but when Anna turned to look behind them, she saw the figure again. Closer this time. The man was there, just at the edge of the yard, his face shadowed and unreadable. He wasn't moving toward them, not yet, but Anna could feel the weight of his presence, like an iron fist reaching out from the darkness. "Mom!" Anna gasped, but her voice was lost in the rush of panic. "He's coming!" Her mother grabbed her arm and yanked her toward the street, her pace quickening. "Keep going!" she cried. "Don't stop!" They kept running, but Anna could hear the faint echo of footsteps behind them. Someone was following them. She didn't dare look back. Her legs burned with the effort, the cold air stinging her face, but there was no stopping now. They had to keep moving. As they turned the corner, Anna caught sight of a car up ahead. A lone vehicle parked on the side of the street, its headlights cutting through the dark. Without thinking, they rushed toward it, hoping for any kind of help, any kind of escape. But when they reached it, the car was empty. The window was rolled down slightly, and Anna could hear a faint sound coming from the interior, a soft, almost inaudible hum. But there was no sign of anyone inside. Her mother cursed under her breath, frustration and fear clouding her face. "What now?" she muttered, looking around frantically. "We can't keep running forever." Anna didn't have an answer. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her, the fear gnawing at her from every direction. They were being hunted. They weren't just escaping, they were running for their lives. Suddenly, the sound of a car engine roared to life, and the headlights blazed in the distance. Anna's heart skipped a beat. Someone else was here. But as the car came closer, she realized with a shock that it wasn't just anyone, it was the same man from earlier. The man who had been at their door. The one who had followed them. His car screeched to a halt right in front of them. Her mother pulled Anna closer, her grip tight as if she could shield her from whatever came next. The man stepped out of the car, his dark coat billowing behind him like a shadow. He was tall, his face unreadable as he surveyed them with cold, calculating eyes. "You shouldn't have run," he said, his voice low and even. "Now, things are going to be a lot more difficult for you." Anna froze, the fear paralyzing her. She could feel her heart pounding in her throat, her breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. What did he want from them? Why had he been following them? Her mother's voice cut through the panic. "What do you want from us?" she demanded, her voice shaking but defiant. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving Anna's mother. "I'm not your enemy," he said finally, his voice softer now. "But you've crossed a line. You're in something bigger than you realize. I'm trying to help you, keep you safe." Anna blinked, struggling to understand. "Safe?" she repeated, her voice. "From what? Who are you?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder as though checking for something, someone. Then, he stepped back, motioning for them to get into the car. "I'll explain everything," he said, his voice laced with an unsettling calm. "But you need to trust me. We don't have much time." Anna and her mother exchanged a glance. The fear in their eyes mirrored in each other's faces. This was their only choice. They had no other options. With trembling hands, Anna opened the car door and slid into the back seat, Shadow nestled in her arms. Her mother followed, the door shutting with a soft click. The man slid into the front seat and started the engine, the hum of the car vibrating through Anna's body. As they drove off into the night, Anna couldn't shake the feeling that they had just stepped into something far darker than anything she had imagined. And no matter how much she wished for peace, she knew that the real fight was just beginning.